Brother picked up his fork, cut into his steak, and said it without even looking at me. "You know Mom and Dad's anniversary is coming up. We're thinking the vineyard." "Martha's vineyard, of course." My mum's eyes lit up the way they always did when my brother spoke. My dad nodded slowly, already calculating, already approving, and I sat there at the end of the table with my glass of water and my half-eaten salmon, feeling the familiar pull of being the person in the room who technically existed but didn't really count. That was 2 years before everything changed, but I'm getting ahead of myself. My brother's name is Conrad, 7 years older than me, Stanford undergrad, Georgetown Law. He passed the bar on his first try, and my parents threw a dinner party for 40 people in our backyard. My dad rented a tent. My mum ordered a custom cake with a gavel on it. When I graduated from art school, my mum made pasta. That's not bitterness talking. That's just the shape of things in our family. The way the furniture was arranged. Something you stopped noticing after a while because it had always been there. Conrad was their proof, their evidence that they'd done something right. He had the corner office downtown, the condo in Lincoln Park, the girlfriend who was also a lawyer. He was the story they told at church, at block parties, at the dentist. Our son Conrad, he's an attorney. And then sometimes like an afterthought. And our daughter Mara is creative. That word carried so much in our family. It was the polite version of impractical. It was what you said when you couldn't say, "We don't really understand what she does." What I did for most of my 20s was photograph food, not for restaurants at first. I started with farmers markets, with friends' pop-up shops, with a food blogger in Wicker Park who paid me $200 a session and thought that was generous. I built a website. I posted on Instagram. I took every job I could get, even the ones that paid almost nothing, because I knew the work would speak eventually if I let it. My family thought it was a phase. I could see it on their faces at every Thanksgiving, every Easter, every random Sunday dinner my mom organized because she liked having us all in one place. Conrad would talk about cases, about clients, about a deposition that went sideways and how he turned it around. My parents would lean forward. My mom would refill his wine without being asked. I would talk about a shoot I'd done for a small Chicago restaurant that was getting some buzz. And my dad would say, "That's nice, sweetheart," in the tone he used for things that did not require follow-up questions. I stopped volunteering information after a while, not out of spite, just self-preservation. The thing about being the overlooked one in a family is that you develop a very particular skill set. You learn to work quietly. You learn that no one is going to hand you a platform or a cheerleader or even a good job. You learn that if you want something, you build it yourself, in whatever small hours you can find without an audience. I became very good at that. By the time I was 28, I had a handful of steady commercial clients. 2 restaurant groups, a specialty grocery chain, a meal kit company that licensed my images quarterly. I had hired a part-time assistant named Lupe, who was sharper than me at scheduling and kept me from double booking. I had an accountant for the first time in my life, which felt like an enormous adult milestone. My income had crossed into 6 figures for the first time the previous year, quietly, without ceremony. I didn't tell my family. This might sound strange. Most people, when something good happens, want to share it with the people they love. I understood that impulse. I had felt it when I landed my first real commercial contract, when my work appeared in a regional magazine, when a food publication I'd admired since college reached out to ask if I'd be interested in contributing. Each time, I'd felt the pull to pick up the phone, and each time I'd thought about what would actually happen if I did. Conrad would ask a clarifying question that wasn't really a question. Is that sustainable though? Or, do they give you benefits? My dad would say that's great and immediately change the subject to Conrad's latest case. My mum would say she was proud of me and then spend the next 20 minutes asking Conrad about his weekend trip to Scottsdale. So I stopped sharing. I kept my world separate. I had my friends, my clients, my work. I had my best friend Simone, who had been there from the beginning and never once called my career a phase. I had my apartment in Pilsen, which I loved, and my little studio in Logan Square that I'd rented since I was 24, cramped and imperfect and entirely mine. And then one Sunday in November, my mum called and asked me to come to dinner. Conrad was bringing his girlfriend. They wanted everyone together. I should have said I was busy. The table was set for 6. Conrad had brought Veronica, who was elegant and warm, and whom I actually liked quite a bit when she wasn't in the middle of whatever performance our family dinners had become. My dad was in a good mood, which meant Conrad had recently done something worth talking about. It turned out Conrad's firm had just won a significant case. Something corporate, something with a number in it that made my dad whistle low through his teeth. The dinner was fine for a while. The food was good. Veronica asked me about my work and seemed genuinely interested, which I appreciated. I told her about a shoot I'd done for a hotel restaurant in the West Loop, described the lighting challenges, the styling. She asked smart questions. It was the kind of conversation I almost never got to have with my family. Then my dad said, "Mara, are you still in that same apartment?" I said yes. He nodded, a specific kind of nod that meant he had a follow-up thought he wasn't quite sure how to frame. You know, property values in that neighborhood have really come up. It might be worth thinking about owning something. Conrad closed on his condo 3 years ago, and the equity alone. She's not at that point yet, Dad, Conrad said, not unkindly, the way you might explain to someone that a child is not yet old enough for a bicycle. I looked at my plate. I've actually been looking, I said. I don't know why I said it. Some reflex, some stubborn need to be part of the conversation on equal terms. Conrad smiled at his wine glass. Looking is different from buying. I know the difference, I said. Real estate in this city is serious money, my dad said. You need to be in a solid financial position. Conrad, what did you put down on your place? And just like that, I had ceased to exist again. The conversation moved to Conrad's condo, Conrad's mortgage rate, Conrad's investment strategy, Conrad's everything. I ate my dinner. I helped clear the plates. I said goodbye and drove home in the dark with the radio off, which is what I did when I needed to think. What I thought about mostly was that I was done explaining myself to people who had already decided what I was. The next 14 months were the busiest of my life. I signed with a commercial photography agency that represented a roster of food and lifestyle photographers nationwide. I flew to New York twice for shoots. I flew to Los Angeles once. A national grocery chain hired me for a campaign, the kind that ends up on billboards and in Sunday circulars, and on the company's social media, to the tune of something that would have made my family's heads spin. I started working with a real estate agent named Phoebe, who was patient and thorough and never once made me feel like I didn't belong in the room she was showing me. The first house I fell in love with was an Oak Park, a 1920s craftsman bungalow with original woodwork and a kitchen that had good north light all morning. 4 bedrooms, which was more than I needed, but one of them would make an extraordinary home studio, the kind of place that required a number I'd never said out loud before, a number I had to sit with for several days, making spreadsheets, calling my accountant, asking Simone to talk me through it 3 or 4 times until I was sure. I made an offer. It was accepted. I did not tell my family. I told Simone. I told Lupe. I sat in my car outside the title company after signing and cried in a way that surprised me. Not sadness, not even pure happiness, but something more like relief. Like the long proof of something I'd been working out for years had finally resolved. I moved in on a Friday in January. Simone and her husband helped me carry boxes. We ordered deep dish pizza and ate it on the floor of the empty living room, and it was one of the best nights I can remember. I still didn't tell my family. My mum called every week or 2, general catch-up calls, and I was vague in the ways I'd always been vague. I was good, work was good. Yeah, still in Pilsen. I didn't lie exactly. I just didn't volunteer. It might seem like I was waiting for something. I wasn't consciously. I had stopped performing for an audience that didn't show up. The house was mine. It didn't need their acknowledgement to be real. Conrad's situation started to unravel about 6 months after I moved in. I heard about it the way I heard about most things in our family, which was second-hand and late. My mum called on a Wednesday afternoon, which was unusual, and said that Conrad had some things going on, and that she and my dad were a little worried. She was vague in a way that was unlike her. My mum was usually precise, almost clinical, when it came to Conrad's life, because she tracked it so carefully. Over the next few weeks, the picture filled in. Conrad had put a significant amount of money, I never learned exactly how much, into a real estate investment with a college friend that had gone badly wrong. The details were murky even to my parents, but the short version was that he was managing some financial pressure that was real and immediate, and his condo, which he'd refinanced at an unfortunate moment, was part of the equation. I want to be clear that I did not feel good about this. Conrad is my brother. Whatever the history between us, watching someone you grew up with struggle is not satisfying. I called him once, left a message, said I was around if he wanted to talk. He didn't call back, which was very Conrad. My parents, I could tell, were shaken. Their architecture had shifted. The story they'd been telling about their family had a crack in it, and they didn't quite know how to hold it. Then one Saturday in March they showed up at my apartment in Pilsen. Except, of course, I didn't live there anymore. I got a call from my mum, confused and slightly sharp. "The woman at your building says you don't live here." "I moved," I said. Silence. "When?" "January." "Mara." My mum said my name the way she did when she was recalibrating. "Where do you live?" I gave her the address. They arrived 45 minutes later. I watched their car pull up from the front window, watched them get out and look at the house the way people look at something that doesn't match their map. My mum's face did something complicated. My dad stood on the sidewalk for a moment longer than necessary. I opened the door before they knocked. My mum looked past me into the entryway. The original oak floors, the built-ins I'd had refinished, the gallery wall I'd spent 2 weekends hanging. Her eyes moved slowly, taking inventory. "This is yours?" my dad said. "Yes." He looked at my mum. She looked at him. That whole conversation happened without words. They came inside. I made coffee. We sat in the kitchen, which had the good north light I'd loved from the first showing, and for a while nobody said much of anything. My mum said, "We didn't know you were doing this well." I kept my hands around my mug. "I know. Why didn't you tell us?" I thought about the dinner in November, about looking as different from buying, about she's not at that point yet, about every version of that conversation across 10 years of Sunday dinners and holiday tables and phone calls, where I described something I was proud of and watched it disappear into the noise of whatever Conrad was doing. I needed to do it without commentary, I said. Not unkind. Just true. My dad looked out the window at the backyard. I'd put a bird feeder out there. Small thing. He didn't say anything. Then my mum said what she'd actually come to say. Conrad needed help. Not a huge amount. By the scale of the house I was sitting in, not a huge amount, but real help. Bridge help, the kind that would keep him from having to sell his condo in a bad market. They weren't asking me to fix everything. They were asking me to help steady something. I let her finish. I thought about the dinner in November for the second time that morning. I thought about being 31 years old and still explaining myself to people who had already decided what I was. I thought about the 14 months I'd spent building something in the quiet while they weren't watching. I said, "I can't do that." My mum's face shifted. "It's not about the money," I said, because I wanted to be honest. "It's that every time I tried to show you what I was building, you changed the subject. I'm not punishing Conrad, but I've spent a long time being invisible in this family, and I'm not going to let the first time you see me be the time you need something from me." My dad turned from the window. He looked like he was going to say something. Then he didn't. My mum's eyes got full. Not crying, just full. "I think you should go," I said. Still not unkind. I meant it that way. They left. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after, in the good north light, not quite sure what I felt. Not satisfaction exactly. Not relief the way it had been when I signed the papers. Something quieter, something like finally being the right size inside my own life. Simone came over that evening and I told her what had happened. She listened the way she always did, without interruption, and when I finished she said, "How do you feel?" "Steady," I said. That was the right word. My family and I have talked since then. Not resolved exactly. Families don't resolve. They just find new arrangements. My mum called 2 weeks later and apologized, not perfectly but genuinely, and I accepted it because I believed her. My dad has said less, but he came to the house again in the spring with a housewarming gift. a cast iron pan, and he looked at the backyard for a long time and said it was a nice place. Conrad and I haven't spoken much. That's his choice more than mine, and I've made peace with it. What I know is this: the house is mine, the work is mine. The life I built in the years nobody was watching, that's mine too. I didn't build any of it to prove something to my family. I built it because it was what I wanted, because it was what I was, because the work was worth doing, whether or not anyone at the table thought so. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't mean something. Standing in the doorway of my own home and watching my parents see it for the first time. Not vindication, just visibility, sometimes that's enough. I've thought a lot about that dinner, the one my comrade said looking is different from buying, and went back to his wine like he hadn't just reduced me to a footnote in my own life. I thought about my dad nodding along, my mum refilling Conrad's glass without being asked. I thought about driving home that night with the radio off, feeling something I couldn't name at the time. Not anger exactly, more like a decision quietly forming. Here's what I've come to understand. The way people treat you over a long period of time shapes you, whether you intend it to or not. It can shrink you if you let it. Or it can teach you something about what you actually need from the world versus what you'd been conditioned to want. I spent years wanting my family's acknowledgement. I'd show up to those dinners with something real to share, something I'd worked hard for, and I'd watch it disappear. At some point, I stopped showing up with my hands open like that, not because I stopped caring about my family, but because I finally understood that their approval was never going to be the foundation I built on. That had to come from somewhere else. What nobody tells you about working quietly without an audience is how clarifying it is. When you remove the performance of it, the hoping someone notices, the preemptive explaining, the bracing for the dismissive comment, what's left is just the work. And the work either holds up or it doesn't. Mine held up. Not because I was exceptional, but because I showed up for it every single day, even on the days when it felt like I was building something no one would ever see. That's the part I want to say clearly. The effort preceded the result by years. The 6-figure income, the agency contract, the house in Oak Park with the morning light I'd dreamed about, none of that appeared because of a single moment of inspiration. It accumulated, slowly, quietly, in the margins of a life my family thought they had already figured out, and when my parents walked through my front door and saw what I had built, I didn't feel what I expected to feel. There was no triumph in it. What I felt was something closer to grief, actually. Grief for all the years I'd spent hoping they would see me before the evidence was standing right in front of them. Grief that it took a craftsman bungalow in Oak Park to make me legible to my own parents. But underneath that, something steadier. The knowledge that I'd made choices, hard ones, lonely ones, unglamorous ones, and that those choices had compounded into a life that was genuinely, fully mine. No one handed it to me. No one co-signed my confidence or cheered me through the slow years. I had Simone, always, and that was not nothing, that was everything. But the work itself I did alone, in the quiet, without permission. Conrad's situation falling apart did not make me glad. It made me sad in the way that watching waste always makes me sad. The waste of potential, of the trust my parents had invested in a story that turned out to be incomplete. He's my brother. That doesn't disappear. What I told my parents that day was true. I couldn't help in the way they were asking, not because I lacked the means, but because the ask contained an assumption I wasn't willing to accept, that I was finally visible now that I was useful. That's not how I wanted to be seen. Not after everything. The house is still mine, the work is still mine, and I am still, quietly, building.